When you think about managing your weight or trying to get healthy, there's this almost universal, slightly depressing image that always pops into your head.
Oh, yeah. Usually involving a gym.
Exactly. It's usually you, totally alone, staring at the glowing red digital timer on a lonely treadmill in some dimly lit corner.
Right, just watching the seconds painfully tick by.
Yeah, and you're feeling every single heavy step on that belt. And you're basically just willing the workout to be over so you can go home.
Mm-hmm.
For a lot of people, let's be honest, it feels less like taking care of your body and more like serving a sentence.
It really does. It's an incredibly isolating experience. And honestly, it's one of the biggest reasons why adherence to exercise programs, well, it just falls off a cliff after a few weeks.
Yeah, the drop-off is massive.
Because we're essentially asking people to engage in a behavior that is physically demanding and quite frankly, often mind-numbingly boring. If you strip away the joy of movement, you're left with just the exertion. And human beings, we're generally not wired to stay with that long term.
Which brings us to a really fascinating question for this deep dive. What if the solution to sustainable weight management isn't forcing yourself back onto that lonely treadmill?
Yeah, what if it looks completely different?
Right. What if the answer looks a lot more like a noisy, playful game on a grass pitch with a bunch of your friends? And that is the core of what we're unpacking today.
It's a huge shift in perspective.
It really is. We're digging into a massive new meta-analysis that approaches obesity and metabolic health from a completely different, much more social angle.
And we have a phenomenal, highly rigorous piece of literature guiding our conversation today. The research team, they didn't just look at one or two localized groups.
Right, they weren't big.
Exactly. They pulled data from across the globe to see if this actually holds up as a legitimate medical intervention.
Yeah, the scope of this is super impressive. So the article we're looking at is titled Intervention Effects of Recreational Football on Obesity-Related Health Outcomes, a Systematic Review and Meta-Analysis.
A mouthful, but very descriptive.
Yeah, exactly. And this was authored by Zhang, Sangyoo Kim, and Jingfeng Wang. It was published in the Journal of Sports Science and Medicine in 2026.
Which is great because it's so recent.
Very recent. So our mission for this deep dive is clear. We're going to look past the hype, dig into the hard clinical data, and basically find out if recreational football is a scientifically valid tool for improving body composition and cardiometabolic health.
Specifically for individuals dealing with overweight or obesity.
Right. But to do that effectively, we first have to define what the researchers actually mean by the intervention itself, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because when we say recreational football, we're definitely not talking about elite athletes peaking for a World Cup.
We're not talking about the Premier League here.
No. We're talking about what a lot of our North American listeners would call soccer. But specifically, Zhang, Kim, and Wang define it as structured or semi-structured sessions aimed purely at health and participation.
Okay, so think of small-sided games in a school gymnasium.
Exactly. Or an organized community session at the local park. Nobody's tackling each other for a trophy.
Right. The focus is entirely on the movement and the engagement.
Yeah, and physiologically speaking, the mechanics of a small-sided football game, they provide a stimulus that's fundamentally different from, say, a steady-state jog.
How so?
Well, it combines intermittent, high-intensity activity with multi-directional movement. You're sprinting for the ball. You're jogging back into position. You're suddenly stopping.
Pivoting, changing direction.
Exactly. And you're doing all of this while communicating with teammates. It's highly variable.
I always think of this kind of sport as a covert form of high-intensity interval training, like HIIT.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Because if you break it down, it is essentially sprinting, jogging, and resting on a loop. But the ball, the game itself, and that social dynamic, they act as a Trojan horse.
A Trojan horse. I like that.
Yeah. They're hiding the workout part so you actually stick with it. Like you're so focused on scoring a goal or just not letting your teammate down that you completely forget you're doing intense intervals.
The engagement factor absolutely masks the exertion. It's brilliant. But, to prove that this Trojan horse actually works in a clinical sense, the authors couldn't just rely on anecdotes.
Right. They need hard data.
Right. So they scoured major databases and narrowed their focus down to 16 randomized controlled trials, or RCTs.
The gold standard.
Exactly. By using RCTs, which randomly assign participants to either play football or act as a control, they could isolate the exact physiological effect of the game itself. It filters out the background noise of everyday life.
And the scope here gives us a really interesting cross-section of people. I was looking at the numbers, and these 16 trials involved 387 participants in total.
Yeah, it's a solid group.
And the ages ranging all the way from 8 years old up to 68 years old.
That's a massive span.
It really is. The interventions lasted anywhere from 3 to 6 months, with people typically playing for about 60 minutes per session, usually 2 to 4 times a week.
And it's a genuine physiological stressor, too. Studies tracking heart rate data showed participants were frequently hitting between 70% and 83% of their maximum heart rate.
Wow, so they are really pushing it.
They are. But what gives this specific meta-analysis so much weight isn't just the heart rate data, it's the methodological rigor applied to it. The authors followed PRISMA 2020 guidelines to ensure their review was completely transparent.
Right.
And they used the grade approach to assess the certainty of their evidence.
Meaning they didn't just, dump all the numbers into a calculator and spit out an average.
No, definitely not.
They applied a critical framework to judge how trustworthy those underlying trials actually were before giving us the final verdict.
And that is the real value of a meta-analysis.
Yeah.
It allows us to find the overall clinical effect size, despite all the minor variations in how the individual studies were run.
Okay, so we know the dose of the exercise. A few hours of small-sided football a week for a few months. Let's look at what actually happens to the body in response.
This is the exciting part.
It is. I want to start with the primary outcomes, which focus on what you see in the mirror body composition. And the data here is incredibly encouraging.
Oh, very much so.
When compared to the control groups, the participants playing recreational football saw statistically significant improvement across several major markers.
Yeah, the most obvious starting point is body mass index, or BMI. The pooled results showed an average decrease of 2.58 kilograms per meter squared.
Wow.
Yeah, that is a clinically meaningful drop.
It really is. But BMI can be a bit of a blunt instrument, right?
Absolutely doesn't tell the whole story.
Right, so it's great that they also looked at body fat percentage across 13 of the studies. And there, participants saw their body fat drop by an average of 2.95%.
Almost a solid 3% drop.
Just from playing a game with friends a few times a week. But okay, the stat that really stopped me in my tracks was waist circumference. The data showed an average shrinkage of 8.15 centimeters.
Over 8 centimeters. I mean, for context, that is roughly the equivalent of dropping 1 to 2 entire pant sizes in a matter of months.
That's incredible.
It is. But aesthetically pleasing as that might be, waist circumference is a critical medical metric because it acts as a proxy for visceral fat.
Okay, that's the dangerous active fat that wraps around your internal organs, right?
Yeah.
The stuff that actively drives metabolic disease.
Precisely. Subcutaneous fat, the fat just under the skin is one thing, but visceral fat actively secretes inflammatory markers into your system.
Yikes.
Yeah. So a reduction of over 8 centimeters in that specific area, that's a massive systemic win for your long-term health.
Okay, so BMI goes down, body fat goes down, the dangerous visceral fat shrinks. Sounds like a total slam dunk.
It does.
But, and then there's always a but in science. As we were reading through the data, I hit a massive roadblock when we got to lean body mass.
Yeah. Yes, the lean mass findings. This was definitely the wild card of the primary outcomes.
Wild card is putting it mildly. The meta-analysis found that lean body mass showed an average decrease of 3.00 kilograms.
Yeah.
Wait, they lost 3 kilos of muscle? That sounds terrible. Aren't we always told by every health professional that building or at least preserving muscle is the absolute key to burning fat and maintaining a healthy metabolism?
That is the conventional wisdom, yes.
So why is a health intervention causing significant muscle loss?
It's a vital question, and it's exactly why we have to look past the top-line average and look at the statistical behavior of the data. The researchers calculated an I-squared value of 74% for the lean body mass outcome.
Okay, you got to translate that for us. What does the 74% I-squared actually mean in practice?
Basically, it means the data was incredibly messy. Statistically, the results were all over the map, what we call high heterogeneity.
So it wasn't consistent across the board.
Exactly. Think of it like trying to calculate the average speed of traffic on a highway, but you're mixing data from bicycles, minivans, and sports cars.
Ah.
Some studies showed a notable gain in muscle mass, while others showed a severe loss. Because the variance is so high, that average number of a 3-kilogram loss is highly unstable and, frankly, a bit suspicious.
So why was it so messy? Is it just that it's notoriously difficult to measure muscle mass accurately outside of a highly controlled lab?
Measurement variation is a huge piece of the puzzle. Some of the trials use decay scans, which are highly accurate and can differentiate bone, fat, and muscle.
Right, those are great.
But others use much simpler bioelectrical impedance scales, and those can be thrown off by something as simple as how hydrated a participant is on that specific day.
Oh, so a drop in water weight could accidentally be recorded as a drop in lean body mass by a cheaper scale.
Absolutely. Furthermore, you have to remember the vast developmental differences in our
Oh,
participants.
right, the 8 to 68 age range.
Oh, exactly. We're mixing data from 8-year-old children who are actively growing with fully developed adults. A child's physiological mechanism for adding muscle is profoundly different from an adult's.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And perhaps most importantly, the researchers noted something concerning in the funnel plots for lean mass.
Okay, let's explain funnel plots because that gets into how science actually gets published. Researchers use these visual graphs to check for the file drawer effect, right?
Yes, exactly.
Basically looking for mathematical clues that studies where the intervention didn't work or maybe produced weird results were quietly stuffed in a desk drawer and never submitted to journals.
That is the perfect way to describe it. For most of the outcomes, like body fat and waist circumference, the data points on the funnel plot were largely symmetrical, which suggests a low risk of publication bias.
Right. What you see is what you get.
What we're seeing is likely the whole picture, but for lean body mass, there was notable asymmetry.
Meaning there might be hidden data out there that would change that 3 kilogram loss average.
Exactly. So between the varied measurement tools, the massive age range, and the signs of publication bias, the researchers essentially concluded that we just don't have a reliable answer yet.
Okay.
Recreational football's true effect on muscle mass is still an open question that requires better, more standardized testing.
Right. I feel a lot better about that. The jury is still out on whether it builds or preserves muscle, but the reductions in overall fat and waist size are undeniable.
Yes, definitely.
But dropping pant sizes is only a visible win. The most insidious parts of obesity are the ones we can't see in the mirror.
So true.
Did this Trojan horse workout actually do anything to clear out the junk in their arteries and improve their vascular system?
This is where we move from obesity as a cosmetic or structural issue to obesity as a driver of chronic disease. We're looking at cardiometabolic health, and the secondary outcomes in this meta-analysis focused heavily on what is happening inside the blood vessels.
And the blood pressure data is fantastic. I was looking at this systolic blood pressure, which is the pressure in your arteries when your heart beats. The top number, it went down by an average of 6.62 millimeters of mercury.
That's a big drop.
And diastolic blood pressure, the bottom number, when the heart is resting, decreased by 2.60 millimeters of mercury.
Those are significant reductions. I mean, for an individual who might be hovering right on the edge of a clinical hypertension diagnosis, a drop of 6 or 7 points can be the difference between needing daily medication and managing their health purely through lifestyle.
That's amazing.
Huh.
We also saw a significant drop in triglycerides, which is the main type of fat circulating in your blood.
Right.
But this brings up a massive question for me. Why would triglycerides drop beautifully and blood pressure improve, and the data shows absolutely zero significant effect on total cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, or HDL cholesterol?
It's a bit perplexing at first glance.
Yeah. The conventional cholesterol markers didn't budge an inch. Why does the body clear one type of fat but completely ignore the other?
It really comes down to the very specific mechanical and metabolic demands of the sport. Let's look at the blood pressure first. Think of your blood vessels like stiff garden hoses.
Okay, stiff garden hoses. Got it.
The sudden, repeated sprinting in a football game forces your heart to pump massive amounts of blood very quickly. This forces those vessels to expand rapidly to deliver oxygen.
So you're essentially exercising the blood vessel itself.
Yes, exactly. The mechanical stress of those high-intensity bursts improves endothelial function, which is the physical elasticity and responsiveness of the vessel walls.
Oh, wow.
So over a few months, those garden hoses become more flexible, which lowers the resting pressure required to pump blood through them.
That makes perfect sense for blood pressure. But what about the lipids? Like, why do the triglycerides vanish while the cholesterol stays put?
Think of triglycerides as the readily available fuel currently sitting in your car's engine lines. When you're doing intermittent exercise, sprinting, recovering, sprinting again, your muscles demand immediate, accessible energy to replenish themselves during those brief recovery windows.
They pull those triglycerides right out of the bloodstream to burn as fuel.
So the start-stop nature of the game acts like a vacuum specifically for blood fat.
Exactly.
The interval nature is uniquely suited to triglyceride metabolism. Cholesterol, on the other hand, is a bit more like the structural rust on the car itself.
Ah,
It's a
okay.
much more complex, deeply ingrained systemic issue. Modifying total cholesterol and LDL lipoproteins usually requires much longer-term interventions, often involving significant dietary overhauls or pharmaceutical assistance.
So one afternoon of driving the car really hard will burn through the fuel in the lines, but it won't fix the rust on the chassis.
That is a perfect analogy. 3 to 6 months of exercise is remarkably good at improving how your blood vessels function and clearing out combustible triglycerides. But moving the needle on stubborn cholesterol markers often takes longer than the window these studies actually observed.
Which is such an important takeaway for you, the listener. If you start a new routine playing a sport like football, and 3 months later your lipid panel doesn't show a perfect, magical sweep of improvements across every single cholesterol marker, you shouldn't get discouraged.
Absolutely not.
You are still doing vital, quantifiable work to protect your heart, clear out triglycerides, and improve the elasticity of your arteries. You're fundamentally reducing your cardiovascular risk factors, even if the total cholesterol takes more time.
It is a critical perspective to maintain. However, as with any rigorous scientific deep dive, we do have to apply the scientific brakes.
Right. Here we go.
With these exciting results, we must shift our focus from the raw numbers to the underlying quality of the data that produce them.
And this brings us back to that grade assessment you mentioned earlier. The authors didn't just celebrate the numbers. They applied a very critical lens to the methodology.
They did.
And they determined that the overall certainty of evidence for these outcomes was graded as only moderate to low, which honestly, that sounds alarming. Does that mean the findings are fake?
Not at all. Moderate to low certainty doesn't mean the findings are false or fabricated. It's simply a measure of statistical confidence.
Okay, so what does it mean practically?
It means we have to be cautious about treating these specific decimal points, like exactly 8.15 centimeters of waist reduction, as absolute, universal facts that will apply to every single person.
Gotcha. What specifically flagged their concern and caused them to downgrade the certainty?
Several factors, actually. First, the risk of bias within the individual trials. While most studies had low risk overall, there are persistent concerns about how randomization was reported.
Oh, like who goes into the control group versus the active group?
Exactly. In clinical research, if you don't clearly document exactly how you randomly assign participants to the football group versus the control group, it opens the door to subtle biases that can skew the results.
There was also a major issue with imprecision, right? Which basically boils down to the sample sizes being way too small.
Correct. Across all 16 studies, we're looking at 387 total participants.
Which seems like a lot for a local study, but...
Right, but in the grand scheme of global clinical trials, that is a tiny cohort. When your total sample size is under 400, your statistical confidence in the exact magnitude of the effect is inherently weakened. A few outliers can drastically shift the averages.
And then there's the glaring limitation of time. These interventions only lasted 3 to 6 months. We have a great snapshot of what happens at the end of month 6.
Yes.
But we have a massive blind spot regarding what happens at month 12 or year 2 or year 5. We don't know the durability of the intervention. Do people actually keep playing once the study ends? Does the weight stay off? The current literature just doesn't tell us.
Those are significant limitations.
Yeah.
But perhaps the most crucial caveat to consider before we generalize these findings is the extreme demographic skew of the participants.
Oh, this is a huge one. Out of the 16 studies included in this meta-analysis, 11 of them focused exclusively on children and adolescents between the ages of 8 and 17.
Yeah.
And furthermore, the data heavily skews male. There are very few data points regarding adult women or broader clinical populations dealing with complex, varied health profiles.
We have to be incredibly careful here. We are taking data that is largely derived from young boys running around playing soccer and trying to extrapolate it to the broader adult population.
Which is biologically absurd if you think about it.
It really is.
A 12-year-old boy's metabolism is essentially a nuclear reactor compared to a 45-year-old woman's. The developmental stages, the baseline hormonal profiles, the muscle recovery rates, they're entirely different physiological landscapes.
It's completely
You
different.
can't just assume a 3-month soccer program will yield the exact same metabolic adaptations for both of them.
You absolutely cannot. The evidence points in a very positive direction,
Yeah.
but the authors are clearly calling for large, well-designed, multi-center randomized controlled trials.
We need more data.
We desperately need studies with standardized protocols, long-term follow-ups, and a much wider, more diverse pool of participants. We need to see the exact metabolic responses for adult women, for aging adults, and for people with different baseline clinical profiles before we can prescribe this universally.
Okay, let's bring all of this together. We set out on a mission to determine if recreational football is a scientifically valid intervention for improving body composition and cardiometabolic health in individuals dealing with overweight or obesity.
And based on the exhaustive, systematic review and meta-analysis by Zhang, Kim, and Wang, the answer leans toward a very solid yes, albeit with some necessary scientific asterisks.
It is an incredibly promising, highly engaging tool. The data clearly shows it's specifically effective at improving BMI, reducing overall body fat percentage, significantly shrinking waist circumference and visceral fat, vacuuming out triglycerides, and improving both systolic and diastolic blood pressure.
And even if the jury is still totally out on whether it builds or preserves lean body mass, and even if it doesn't seem to move the needle on structural cholesterol in a short time frame, the overall reduction in major cardiometabolic risk factors is undeniable.
As always, this has been a deep dive into an academic meta-analysis pulling out the most vital insights. But there is so much more nuance in the methodology, the statistical models, and the exact trial breakdowns.
So much more.
We highly encourage you to go read the full article by Zhang, Kim, and Wang in the Journal of Sports Science and Medicine for a comprehensive look at their subgroup analyses and forest plots.
And if you find this kind of detailed, accessible, evidence-based breakdown valuable, please make sure to follow the channel and turn on your notifications. We're committed to bringing you more scientifically rigorous content just like this every week.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final, slightly provocative thought to mull over. We spent this entire time talking about the hard physiology, the heart rates, the endothelial function of your blood vessels, the lipid metabolism pathways. But maybe, just maybe, we're missing the forest for the trees here.
It's a profound point.
Mm.
Because the real magic of recreational football might not be purely physiological at all. Think about the greatest hurdle to managing obesity or chronic health conditions. It's long-term exercise adherence.
It's sticking to it.
It's the crushing mental fatigue of maintaining a routine that you secretly hate.
Which brings us right back to that lonely treadmill we started with. Could the simple, deeply human desire to just play a game with friends, the laughter, the camaraderie, the shared goal, be the most powerful, underutilized medical intervention we actually have?
It completely shifts the paradigm from exercise as a punishment you endure to exercise as a community event you look forward to. When you remove the isolation and replace it with connection, you might just solve the adherence problem permanently.
It really makes you reconsider how you approach your own health, doesn't it? You don't have to just stare at a timer in a dark gym. You can grab a ball, find a pitch, call up some friends, and literally play your way to better health. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.